Her eyes were the color of a storm gathering over the ocean, and they were filled with a terrifying, desperate sort of calm. "I need you to be my fiancé." The words just hung there in the dusty air of my basement workshop, between the smell of soldering flux and old pipes. I had a half-disassembled water pump on my workbench and grease up to my elbows. She was standing in the doorway, framed by the dim light of the service corridor, looking like she'd stepped out of a different world. A world with tailored coats and shoes that cost more than my monthly rent. I blinked.
"I'm sorry."
"My fiancé," she repeated, the words clipped, precise. Not a hint of a tremor in her voice, but her knuckles were white where she gripped the strap of her purse. "Just for an afternoon. Maybe a few days. I can pay you. Handsomely." I looked from her sharp, intelligent face down to my worn boots, then back up again. This was the kind of thing that happened in movies, not in the subterranean world of a building superintendent. Not to me. I opened my mouth to say no, to give her the polite but firm brush-off I gave to tenants with ridiculous requests. But I didn't. Instead, I heard myself say, "Okay." And that is how I, Leo Armitage, a 34-year-old man who lived with ghosts and preferred the company of broken things, ended up engaged to a complete stranger. That is how I met my wife. Let me back up. My name is Leo. I'm 34, and for the last 10 years, I've been the superintendent of the Althena, a pre-war apartment building in a part of the city that was trying very hard to be glamorous. My world was one of boilers, wiring, plumbing, and the quiet hum of a building breathing around me. I lived in a small apartment in the basement, a perk of the job. It was my cave, my sanctuary. I was good at my job. I was quiet, I was competent, and I was invisible, which is exactly what a good super should be. I could diagnose a death rattle in a radiator from 2 floors away and coax a century-old elevator back to life with little more than a wrench and a well-placed threat. I fixed things. That's what I did. People, however, were a different story. I had stopped trying to fix people a long time ago. I had stopped wanting much of anything, really. After my father died, something in me just switched off. He was a mechanic, a man with hands as calloused as my own. He taught me how to listen to an engine, how to feel the subtle vibration that tells you where the problem is. He was my compass, my anchor. When a sudden heart attack took him, it felt like the world's gravity had failed. Then came Amelia. Amelia was bright and beautiful and saw my quietness not as steadiness, but as a project, a fixer-upper. She wanted to renovate my soul. She dragged me to parties where I felt like a ghost, introduced me to friends who looked through me, and talked endlessly about a future I couldn't picture. A future with white picket fences and Sunday brunches and children. Family. I was not the kind of man who got a family. I knew this in my bones. I was the guy who fixed the family's furnace. Our relationship ended, as I always knew it would, with her crying and accusing me of being emotionally vacant. "It's like you're not even here, Leo. It's like trying to love a wall." She wasn't wrong. The wall had been going up for years, but she was the one who'd put the final coat of paint on it. After her, I just gave in. I retreated to my basement. I took the extra shifts. I let the silence become my companion. I was a ghost in a machine, keeping the building alive while feeling nothing myself. My father had this saying. We'd be in his garage, working on some busted-up car somebody had given up on, and he'd see me getting frustrated, trying to force a part that wouldn't fit. He'd put a heavy hand on my shoulder. "Son," he'd say, his voice rumbling like a low, idling engine. "You don't break a wild thing to make it trust you. You earn it, quietly. You just stay near, stay steady, and let it see you're not a threat. Trust is earned in the quiet, not taken in the noise." He was usually talking about a skittish dog that hung around the garage or a particularly stubborn engine, but I knew he meant it for everything. For years, I thought I'd failed his lesson. I'd let Amelia try to break me into the shape she wanted. And when that failed, I just walled myself off from everything. I wasn't earning anyone's trust. I wasn't even trying. Until this woman, this stranger with a storm in her eyes, showed up at my door and asked me to help her pull off the biggest lie of her life. And for the first time in a decade, A switch I thought was permanently off flickered with a tiny, unfamiliar spark. Curiosity. We sat at the small, scarred table in my apartment's kitchenette. I'd made her a cup of tea, a gesture that felt both ridiculously domestic and entirely inadequate. My hands, scrubbed clean but still ingrained with the day's grime, felt huge and clumsy around the delicate porcelain cup I kept for the rare occasion a tenant's emergency was emotional rather than mechanical. Her name was Clara. She took a sip of the tea, her gaze fixed on the steam coiling into the air. "Thank you," she said, her voice softer now. The desperate edge was gone, replaced by a deep, resonant weariness. "You don't have to pay me," I said, surprising myself. She looked up, her eyes meeting mine.
Ido.
"This isn't a small favor. Tell me what it is first," I countered. "Then we can talk about payment." She took a deep breath, the kind you take before diving into cold water. "My mother lives in this building, apartment 12B. Her name is Eleanor Vance." I knew Eleanor, a sweet, forgetful woman who sometimes called me down because she couldn't remember how to work her remote control. She always offered me butterscotch candies from a crystal dish on her coffee table. "I know her," I said. "She's a nice lady." A flicker of pain crossed Clara's face. "Yes, she is. She also has early-onset Alzheimer's. It's progressing faster than we'd hoped." The pieces started to click into place. The expensive coat, the exhaustion, the desperation. "My ex-boyfriend, Julian, is trying to have her declared legally incompetent," she continued, her voice hardening. "He wants to be granted conservatorship over her and her estate." "Her ex-boyfriend?" I asked, confused. "Or yours?" "Mine," she said, a bitter twist to her lips. "Julian and I were together for 3 years. He was charming. Everyone loved him. My mother adored him. When we broke up, he stayed close to her. He positioned himself as the son she never had, the reliable 1-inch. She stared into her cup. I was the one taking her to doctor's appointments. I was the one managing her medications. I was the one who quit my job in Chicago and moved back here to be her full-time caregiver when things got bad. But Julian is a lawyer. He's smooth. He has convinced everyone, including some of our family, that I'm unstable, that I'm after her money, that I'm not fit to care for her. The injustice of it was a physical thing, a sour taste in the back of my throat. He filed a petition with the court. He's claiming I'm emotionally volatile and financially irresponsible. He's using the fact that I'm unemployed against me. He even managed to convince my mother's daytime caregiver to quit last week, then used that as proof of my inability to manage things. She finally looked at me, and the storm was back in her eyes. "There's a meeting tomorrow, here, at my mother's apartment, with a court-appointed evaluator. Julian will be there. He's going to paint a picture of me as a frantic, single, unemployed woman who is in over her head. He'll look like the calm, successful, stable savior." I saw it then, the whole ugly picture. The world saw a difficult, unstable daughter. Julian, the charming hero. But the truth was the opposite. She was the one holding everything together, and he was the one trying to tear it all down for his own gain. She was sacrificing everything to protect her mother, and the world was punishing her for it. "So you need a fiancé," I said, the words tasting different now. Not like a line from a movie, but like a shield, piece of armor. "I need to look stable," she corrected, her voice barely a whisper. "I need to look supported. I need to look like I have a life, a future. I need someone to stand next to me and not let him make me look small." She looked down at her hands. "It's a ridiculous, desperate plan. I know, but I am desperate. He's trying to take my mother away from me. He wants to put her in a facility he's chosen, miles away from here, and take control of everything. I can't let that happen. She deserves to be in her home, surrounded by things she knows, for as long as possible." I thought of my father. I thought of his quiet strength. "You just stay near, stay steady." This woman wasn't a wild thing. She was a fighter, but she was being hunted, and she was tired. "Okay," I said again. This time I knew why. This was a different kind of broken thing. And maybe, just maybe, I knew how to fix this. Not by forcing anything, but by being steady. We'll need a story, I said, my voice taking on the same practical tone I used when planning a boiler replacement. Clara's head snapped up, her eyes wide with a mixture of shock and dawning hope. You'll really do it. I said I would. I leaned forward. So let's build this. How did we meet? And so, in the quiet hum of my basement apartment, we began to invent a life. Somewhere in the inventing, the strangest thing happened. We stopped inventing and started actually talking. I was having a terrible day, she began, a small, sad smile on her face. My mother had. She'd forgotten who I was for the first time. For a whole hour. I went for a walk to clear my head and the heel of my shoe broke, and I was just coming out of the hardware store. I picked up, the image forming easily in my mind. I saw you, looking like you were about to cry. I offered to help. I had some epoxy in my bag. I thought you were a serial killer, she said, and a genuine, startlingly beautiful laugh escaped her. I get that a lot, I deadpanned. It's the quiet competence. Very menacing. She laughed again, and the sound was like turning on a light in a dusty room. We talked for hours. We decided we'd been dating for 6 months. We invented dates, a walk through the botanical gardens, a disastrous attempt at cooking Italian food, a shared love for old black and white movies. With every detail we added, the line between fiction and something else began to blur. I learned that she used to be an architectural historian, that her favorite building was the Chrysler Building, that she missed the smell of old books and the thrill of discovering a blueprint that told a forgotten story. I saw the passion in her eyes when she talked about it, a light that had been dimmed by her current reality. She learned about my father, about his garage, about my quiet life in the basement of the Althena. I told her about Amelia, about feeling like a wall. I didn't mean to. The words just came out. She didn't say anything for a long moment. She just watched me, her gaze steady and unervingly perceptive. You're not a wall, Leo, she said softly. You're a foundation. Walls are just for show. A foundation is what holds the whole house up. No one had ever said anything like that to me before. No one had ever looked at my quietness and seen strength instead of absence. The next afternoon, I stood in my best clothes, which weren't very good, outside apartment 12B. I felt like an imposter. My heart was hammering against my ribs, a frantic, unfamiliar rhythm. Clara opened the door. She was wearing a simple blue dress. She looked tired but resolute. She reached out and straightened my collar. Her fingers were cool against my skin. The small, simple touch sent a jolt through me. Ready? She whispered. I nodded. Let's go. The apartment was filled with a tense, cloying silence. Her mother, Eleanor, was sitting in a plush armchair, looking confused, and standing by the window, silhouetted against the afternoon light like a villain in a play, was Julian. He was exactly as I'd pictured. Tall, handsome, wearing a suit that probably cost more than my car. He exuded an effortless, predatory charm. He turned as we entered, a perfectly calibrated smile spreading across his face. Clara, darling, he said, his voice smooth as silk. And you must be? He trailed off, his eyes flicking over me with dismissive appraisal. This is Leo, Clara said, her voice firm. She stepped closer to me, her arm linking through mine. It felt both shockingly intimate and as solid as a rock. My fiancé. Julian's smile didn't falter, but something cold flickered in his eyes. He saw a threat where he'd expected to see a void. The evaluator, a stern-looking woman named Mistress Albright, observed us all with a neutral expression. The next hour was a masterclass in manipulation. Julian spoke in calm, concerned tones. He recounted instances of Eleanor's memory lapses, framing them as emergencies that Clara had mishandled. He brought up Clara's unemployment, her isolation. He painted a picture of a loving son figure trying to save his beloved mother figure from a daughter who was cracking under the strain. I watched Clara. She sat straight, her hand resting on her mother's, her jaw tight. She was absorbing every blow, every subtle lie, every twist of the knife. And I could feel the sheer force of will it was taking for her not to shatter. Later that week I saw it, the moment of seeing. I was on my way up to fix a leaky faucet in 14G when I heard raised voices from the lobby. It was Mr. Henderson from 8C, a notoriously grumpy old man, yelling at the part-time doorman, a young kid named Sam. Henderson was claiming a package had been stolen. It was right here. I'm telling you, this building is going to the dogs, he bellowed. Clara was just coming in. She saw the scene. Henderson red-faced and shouting, Sam pale and stammering. She could have just walked past. She had more than enough on her own plate. But she didn't. She walked calmly over to Mr. Henderson. Mr. Henderson, she said, her voice quiet but clear, cutting through his tirade. What did the package look like? A brown box. From my son, he snapped. Right? She said, nodding. I think I saw it. I think one of the delivery guys put it in the mailroom by mistake instead of leaving it with Sam. Let me go check for you. She gave Sam a small, reassuring nod and disappeared into the mailroom. A minute later, she emerged with a brown box. Here we are. It was tucked behind the recycling bins. Easy to miss. Henderson grumbled, snatched the box, and stomped toward the elevator without a word of thanks. Clara turned to Sam, who looked like he was about to cry with relief. Don't worry about him, she said softly. His bark is much worse than his bite. You're doing a great job. She didn't know I was there. She didn't know I was watching from the top of the stairs. It was a small act, a moment of quiet kindness to a stranger. She defended the defenseless. She absorbed the anger and deflected it with grace. In that moment, standing on the marble staircase, I knew. I wasn't just pretending. I wasn't just helping her out. I was falling in love with her. The final meeting was set for the following week, this time in a conference room at the lawyer's office. Felt colder, more official, more final. Julian was in his element. He had documents. He had a timeline. He had a witness, the caregiver he'd paid off, who testified via phone that Clara was always crying and seemed overwhelmed. He delivered his closing argument with practiced sincerity. Mistress Albright, Mr. Davies, he said, addressing the evaluator and the family lawyer. My only concern here is for Eleanor. She needs professional, stable care. Clara, for all her good intentions, is not in a position to provide that. She's unemployed. She's emotionally fragile. She needs to get her own life in order before she can be responsible for her mother's. He turned his gaze on me. And while it's lovely that she's found a new companion, he said, the word dripping with condescension, this is a very new relationship. It's hardly a foundation upon which to build a life care plan for an elderly woman. Mistress Albright turned her cool gaze to me. Mr. Armitage, Julian makes a compelling case. What is your response to the assertion that Clara is too unstable and overwhelmed to be a primary caregiver? The room was silent. Julian was smirking. Clara was staring at the table, her shoulders slumped. She looked defeated. I thought of my father's hands on my shoulder. Stay steady. Don't break it. Earn it. I didn't look at Julian. I looked directly at Mistress Albright. Ma'am, I began, my voice quiet but carrying in the still room. I'm a building superintendent. I fix things for a living. My job is to see how systems work, to spot the stress points before they break. I paused, letting the words settle. For the past few weeks, I've had a front row seat to the system that is Eleanor Vance's life. Julian is right about one thing. It is a stressful system. I've seen Clara on the phone with doctors, pharmacists, insurance companies, and physical therapists, sometimes all before 10 in the morning. I've seen her patiently explain the same thing to her mother 5 times in an hour, with the same gentle tone every time. I've seen her research recipes for people who have trouble swallowing. I've seen her label every single cabinet and drawer in that apartment to help her mother maintain a sense of independence. I leaned forward slightly. Julian says Clara is unemployed. I disagree. She's working 3 jobs. She's a nurse, a project manager, and a full-time daughter. The only reason she's not getting a paycheck is because the person she's working for is her own mother. I finally glanced at Julian. His smirk was gone. He says she's emotionally fragile, I continued, turning back to the evaluator. I see a woman who is carrying an immense emotional weight with a grace that I've never seen in my life. Being sad that your mother is fading away isn't a sign of instability. It's a sign of love. The only thing fragile in this situation is the narrative he's trying to sell you. I looked at Clara. She had lifted her head, and there were tears in her eyes. But these weren't tears of defeat. They were tears of something else. Relief. You're right, I said to Mistress Albright. Our relationship is new, but I've learned more about character and strength and integrity from Clara in the last few weeks than I have in the last 10 years. A person who shows that kind of devotion and quiet strength when the world isn't looking. That's not an unstable person. That's the most stable person I've ever met. I sat back. I hadn't raised my voice. I hadn't attacked Julian directly. I had just reported what I'd seen. I had just told the truth. The silence in the room was different now. It wasn't tense. It was thoughtful. Mistress Albright looked from me to Clara. She looked at Julian, whose polished charm had cracked, revealing the ugly entitlement underneath. She nodded slowly. Thank you, Mr. Armitage. That was illuminating. The narrative had cracked. The foundation of Julian's lies, built on charm and condescension, had crumbled under the simple, quiet weight of the truth. We didn't speak on the elevator ride down. We didn't speak in the taxi back to the building. The silence wasn't awkward. It was full. Full of everything that had been said and everything that hadn't. Back in my basement apartment, the air was thick with it. The pretense was over. The performance was done. We were just Leo and Clara again. A super and a stranger. But that wasn't true anymore, was it? She stood by the door, twisting the strap of her purse. Thank you, Leo, she whispered, for everything. I should go check on my mom. She was turning to leave, turning to walk out of my life as suddenly as she had walked in. And the thought of this apartment, this life, returning to its silent, gray state was unbearable. The thought of the light she'd brought with her being turned off again was a physical pain. Clara, I said, my voice hoarse. She stopped, her back to me. I don't want to go back, I said. She turned around slowly, her brow furrowed. Go back where? To before. To being the ghost in the basement. To fixing pipes and feeling nothing. I took a step toward her. This isn't pretend for me anymore. I don't know when it stopped being pretend. But it did. Maybe it was when you laughed at my terrible jokes. Maybe it